At popular request from chat, I think it's time to look at the history of the Ukraine war.
Over the past 3 years, hundreds, maybe thousands of Western journalists have covered the war in Ukraine from Ukraine and effectively been attached to the Ukrainian government and its military and its many propaganda outlets, taking their talking points from Ukrainian government officials, interviewing President Zelensky, always.
All you're getting is the Western perspective of the Ukraine war. If you're someone who gets the news from mainstream media, you don't even know the basic facts of what's going on in Ukraine.
The most fawning possible way, and effectively carrying water for both the Ukrainian government and NATO, and above all, for the Biden administration. On the other side, in this war that the United States has effectively paid for, there is one Western journalist, one American embedded with Russian troops. His name is Patrick Lancaster. He's from St. Louis, Missouri. He's a U.S. Navy veteran. And for the past 11 years, he's been reporting from the region. For the past 3 years, he's been reporting from the front lines. He's been interviewed by precisely no other mainstream Western media organizations.
Of course, Western media isn't trying to give their populations the truth. It's trying to feed them the narrative it wants, even if that narrative is entirely fiction.
And so it raises the question, how can you understand a war you're expected to take sides in and then pay for if you're not hearing the other side? So with that in mind, here's Patrick Lancaster. Patrick Lancaster, thank you so much for joining us. So you're one of the only, maybe the only American reporter embedded with Russian troops in this war. How long have you been there?
Hi, Tucker. It's really an honor to be on here with you to show a little bit to the world about what the mainstream media doesn't want a lot of the people around the world to see. So it's really great, and I appreciate the invitation. I have been covering this conflict, this war, for a lot longer than many people understand that it's going on. As you know, this didn't start 3 years ago. It started in 2014. Some say even before. But for all
2014 is a good time to say it started. There was stuff before, but most of this Ukraine problem started in 2014.
Intents and purposes, we could say 2014 when the war started. Following the events in Crimea, where Crimea joins or rejoined Russia, because there was a referendum. That's where I first started reporting on the situation between Russia and Ukraine. I went to Crimea for the referendum where the Crimean people voted to break away from Ukraine and join Russia, or rejoin Russia, because before 1956, Crimea was part of Russia. So if you think about this, the people that were born before that year were born in Russia. So there's people living that were born in Russia that were literally so happy to be joining Russia again, going home, as the people on the streets told me when I was there. And I've been there almost every year reporting since then as well.
My sister was a journalist, and she actually went to Crimea right at this time in 2014. And so I can confirm from her reporting that, yes, Crimea was 100% on board with becoming part of Russia. They were happy about it.
But that's what really triggered my interest and intensity in reporting on the situation between Ukraine and Russia, because when I went from Europe to Crimea and saw the huge difference in what was being reported in the Western mainstream media about the real situation in Crimea. We're hearing in the West how Russian forces were going to be making people vote to break away from Ukraine and join Russia. And I saw just a total opposite. People just crying out of happiness to have the chance to rejoin Russia. And those are the real facts. And anyone that has been to Crimea knows that. And anyone that says something besides that is just not telling the truth and trying to hide the truth. And unfortunately, after the events in Crimea, where they joined, the northern regions of Donetsk and Lugansk ended up becoming part of what you could say a civil war, where they as well had a referendum to break away from Ukraine, and that preceded the 8-year civil war.
So, in 2014, sorry, that's lightning outside, thunder. Anyway, 2014, the democratically elected president of Ukraine was forced to flee by Western-backed organized forces. And U.S. basically straight up appointed who they wanted in Ukraine. It was a pure puppet government, as pure as you can get. You had Vice Secretary of State Nuland calling up Ukraine. That phone call got leaked, and she told them who to put in charge. That is what you call puppet government. Anyway, the citizens in these regions, all their trade is with Russia. They're ethnic Russians. They speak Russian. They believe in the Russian Orthodox Church. And the new government was saying, we're going to break ties with Russia. No more trade with Russia. That would have been economic devastating to this region. So that alone was enough reason for this part to revolt. The second part is people that took over from the pro-Russian president were extremely anti-Russian, hating ethnic Russians. So these places vote to join Russia, and it was a civil war. I think he'll explain more, but that is the basic scenario. So a war between Ukraine, Western-backed Ukraine, and the citizens of this region.
Where after the vote, the republics that they called themselves Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics started to make their own governments, make their own militaries, and they were attacked after this referendum by Ukraine. And I spent 8 years covering the situation in the Donetsk.
And if you know why I don't support Ukraine, for those 8 years, I was getting the news stories. I knew about this shelling of the Donbass, because this region right here, Donbass region, and when you're shelling constantly, that's basically terrorism. It's just civilian deaths, indiscriminate shelling, throwing bombs into the breakaway region.
And Lugansk areas, just documenting my part of the puzzle or the pie that wasn't being shown in the Western mainstream media. Because what I was showing then and now, what Western mainstream media doesn't.
And I guarantee you, in Russia, they were getting reporting on this. They were knowing about the shelling going on month after month of ethnic Russians here in Ukraine.
It's not convenient for them to show. It doesn't fit their narrative. So I documented what they weren't. The indiscriminate shelling of residential areas by Ukraine, the targeting of civilian areas by Ukraine. I mean, my wife is from Donetsk. Her childhood home was destroyed by Ukrainian shelling, as well as the majority of her childhood neighborhood.
Terrible.
I mean, these are the facts of the things that happened in the Donetsk and Lugansk territories long before 2022, when Russia came into this war. From 2014 till 2022 is when this civil war took place. And of course, Ukraine and the West claimed Russia had invaded all the way back in 2014. That was the narrative then. But eventually that kind of slowly went away when they realized that this 8-year war wasn't really, there was no regular Russian troops taking part in that. This was a civil war that was lightly supported by the West, Ukraine supported by the West.
Wait, may I ask you a question to clarify something? So you said that your wife's childhood home was destroyed by shelling from the Ukrainian government. Why were they shelling your wife's house? Like, was her family part of the fighting?
There was indiscriminate shelling of the Donbass side by the Ukraine Azov Brigade because they basically hate ethnic Russians. There's a reason Russia refers to them as Nazis.
Why would they do that?
Well, they pretty much leveled most of her childhood home, or childhood neighborhood, where her mother's home was. This neighborhood is just one of the many around Donetsk and the suburbs of Donetsk, and specifically around the Donetsk airport. The Donetsk airport was like a symbol of the war back in 2014, 2015, where there was literally so much fighting. There were 2 terminals. One terminal had the Ukrainian forces in it. One had the Ukraine government forces, or rebels, or pro-Russian forces, whatever you want to call them, the locals that took up arms to fight to try to break away from Ukraine. And they were fighting. And basically, Ukraine leveled, not completely leveled, but damaged, if not destroyed, the majority of the homes all around this area, around the airport, just with indiscriminate shelling and of the areas, the neighborhoods, and just destroying or seriously damaging almost every home. And it just so happened my wife's childhood home was one of those. Thank God her family and her.
It's not just Ukraine, like Syria, the genocide of Christians. That wasn't covered in the media because the CIA and Mossad were supporting ISIS from 2011 to 2014 and onwards to overthrow the Assad regime. So you had genocide, you had videos on, alternative sites of all the executions of Christians there. It's same thing. It just when the Western aligned forces, whether it's ISIS or the Ukrainians, what they do is not covered in Western media. And so people don't realize when they're supporting Ukraine, they're supporting the bad guys. They're supporting the monsters.
Made it out okay. They were living there when the war started, and they made it out okay. But the house was destroyed. This is just one example of many homes and families that lost everything in the war.
I don't remember hearing in the United States at the time that there was a war in Ukraine.
Yeah, you didn't hear about the genocide of Christians in, it was only 2015 or 2014 when the articles started appearing in Western media. And it took like 1 million Christians being genocided. And it's 3 years into it when finally you started getting articles in the West about the mass slaughter of Christians in Syria. They tried to delay it as long as possible. That's the Western media for you. When the U.S. is conducting operations against a country, whether it's Russia or the separatists in Ukraine or the Assad regime, the media cooperates and hides the crimes being committed against our adversaries.
I mean, my sense is this was basically ignored completely, and that Ukraine at that time was effectively under the control of the Obama administration. That was my...
Yeah, that's another thing. Most Americans don't know that the area that Putin came in and seized here, that was not under Ukrainians' control when the Ukraine war started. It's not like Russia conquered those territories. They just were invited in with open arms in that area.
That was my sense.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't really understand what was really happening on the ground. But basically, I mean, it goes back to the Maidan Revolution or whatever you want to call it. It's all in the eye of the beholder. The locals...
More thunder.
In the eastern part of Ukraine at that point looked at the Maidan Revolution as an illegal coup supported by the West.
It was an illegal coup supported by the West. You had a democratically elected president. He was pro-Russian. The West didn't like that. So they funded groups, NGOs, that organized mass protests. Then there were snipers in Maidan buildings that shot at the police and the protesters. That was spread all over Western media. Oh no, the horrible pro-Russian president is murdering innocent protesters. And yes, innocent protesters were being murdered, but it wasn't government forces that were doing it. It was Western-backed snipers. And then that caused the president to flee, and we put in our puppets to govern Ukraine for us, we the United States. And I think the side that shoots innocent protesters is the bad side. And Ukraine, in 2014, Maidan, was an example of bad guys winning.
Where ended up with their democratically elected president, Yanukovych, removed from office without them having anything to say about it, and which effectively made their Ukraine dead.
Imagine our president of the United States gets thrown out of power, and Chinese appoint our new president. Do you have a duty to respect the new president that you didn't vote for, that China appointed? It's that type of scenario. This is now a puppet state. It's not a legitimate government. Of course, especially if that new government hates you and your ethnicity and your religion and wants to oppress you and openly states that, of course you're going to rebel.
Not in existence anymore after a puppet government was put in by the United States in the West.
Remember, before these regions broke away, what happened in Odessa, 50 ethnic Russians were herded into a building by these neo-Nazi Ukrainian, and then that building was set on fire. I mean, then that is the type of, yeah, that's, they want ethnic cleansing, the Azov Brigade. They want the land, but they don't want the people on the land. Ukraine is fighting to take the land. Ethnic Russian living on it, those are, they want to do to those the same thing Israel wants to do to the Palestinians in Gaza.
People of the Donetsk and Lugansk areas just, they said, okay, well, that's not our Ukraine. Ukraine's gone. Some of them were patriots for Ukraine before. They just said, okay, we don't have anything to do with that. We're going to have a vote. We're going to vote ourselves what to do with the right of self-determination. And Ukraine and the West did not want to respect the right of determination. And Ukraine basically, in the words of the locals, punished them for them trying to break away from Ukraine. And every local family knew.
The West still talks about Ukraine going all the way to Crimea and taking Crimea. The people of Crimea overwhelmingly want to be part of Russia. How is that? How can you be pro-democratic and try to force like 96% ethnic Russians? Some were crying with happiness when they got to join Russia. Also, there were some people that were born in Crimea when it was still Russia. And then it got because of the Soviet Union, and they grouped this territory together in one administrative unit called Ukraine, when really this portion of it right here is basically overwhelmingly ethnic Russian. More towards here. Here it's more mixed. Here is original Ukraine up here. Up here is original Ukraine. It's Crimea. Europe's trying to override the will of the people in Ukraine, the ones that don't want to be part of Ukraine.
Someone or had a member of their family injured or killed in the attacks by Ukrainian forces on the civilian areas of these regions, specifically the cities of Donetsk and Lugansk.
Amazing. Data hawks are collecting your information.
The building is actually shaking because of the thunder right now. It's loud.
There, rotate before this happens to you. IdentityGuard.com/Tucker. So you've been there, rotating in and out, or living there ever since, all these years. How did things change 3 years ago when the war began?
Well, it was quite an interesting time, as you can imagine. Just a couple of days before it all started with Russia. Russia officially came in. Russia officially recognized the Lugansk and Donetsk republics as separate from Ukraine. And the people had celebrations on the streets out of just celebrating the fact that Russia recognized them. And they knew that that meant that Russia was going to be helping
protecting them from now on. That the shelling that had gone on the past 8 years would eventually come to an end.
These republics. And then days later, Russia came across the border, and the war between Ukraine and Russia started. You know, one way or another, the war between Russia and the West has started, Western weapons at least. And as many people around the world thought it was going to go a lot quicker than it has,
it didn't. During those 8 years, where you had the separatist region and then you had the Ukrainian-controlled region, Ukraine built up this vast network of fortifications along the border between the two. And it was not just one layer, several layers deep. And that's what slowed Russia down, that and drones.
Myself did a report in the center of Donetsk where I assumed and thought that Russia was going to be pushing Ukraine back within days from the city of Donetsk. Because you have to imagine the front line of Donetsk was just on the outskirts of the city. We're talking from the center of the city to the edge, just about to the front line, just about 5 miles, with often just straight shelling hitting the center of the city. And as we know, it didn't end in 3 days like General Miley said it would.
Yeah, imagine you're someone living in Donetsk, and you are living in a city that's being shelled for 8 years by the Ukrainians, just 5 miles away or 6 miles away. do you want to be part of that Ukraine? The Ukraine has been shelling you for 8 years? And that's what people in the West that just believe what the mainstream media tells them. They think, oh, we need to liberate Ukraine. No, what you say, liberate Ukraine, would mean the brutal suppression and ethnic cleansing of ethnic Russians in Donbass. It would be like Gaza on a bigger scale.
And there's been a lot of intense battles around these areas. And in fact, right now, I believe there is 8 regions between what is internationally recognized as Ukraine, or Russia recognizes as Russia. But overall, there's 8 regions that have active fighting. Some are Russian, some are pre-war Russian, after-war Russian, whatever you want to call it. We've got the Zaporozhye region, Kherson region, Donetsk region, and Lugansk region, which all 4 of those had referendums in 2022 September, where the Russian-backed referendums, unrecognized by the West, where they voted to join Russia. And then shortly after, Russia took them in officially. And then in addition to those 4 regions, you've got 2 regions of Russia, the Belgorod region of Russia and the Kursk region of Russia, where Ukraine came across the border and incurred on.
And terrible things happened to the Russians that were living in those regions when the brigades came over the border.
On pre-2022 Russia, and in the area of Kursk, they controlled last August about 1,500 square kilometers. Since then, it's been really reduced by Russian forces. But in addition to those 6 territories, we've also got the Sumy region of Ukraine, which there's some villages and some territory that Russia controls. And there's active, very intense fighting going on there. And now that's borders the Kursk region. So basically, Russia went past the territory that was controlled by Ukraine in the Kursk region of Russia and took territory in the Sumy region. Now, also in the Kharkov region of Ukraine, Russia controls some territory as well. And again, intense fighting going on there. So we've got 8 regions with intense fighting, and the war keeps changing. So much has changed, of course, in the last 11 years, as far as how the fighting has changed and how it's going on now. And even since 2022, when Russia first came in, and now the situation is the air war, the drone war. Yep. I mean, it's like the war of the future now compared to what it used to be 11 years ago. I mean, the most dangerous part of my job is actually getting to the front line to film what's happening on the front line, because in the vehicles, getting there.
Yeah, drones target cars, any vehicle. That's their number one targets.
It's just, there's always drones around, and these are kamikaze drones that are the main threat. Of course, there's reconnaissance drones as well, but these kamikazes, they will just they're hunting vehicles around and going back and forth on the front line, and they'll just hit the vehicle and explode. And now they've even gone a step forward where jamming or electronic warfare doesn't affect them, because they use fiber optic cables to control these drones with this little bitty
fiber optic FPV drones.
Cable goes from behind the drone to the remote control. They're cabled drones, and they can go up to 30 kilometers. And actually,
these drones have a little bottle underneath them where they have the spool of fiber optic cable, and that's how there's no way to jam them because of that.
This right here is some of the fiber optic cable that is used to control.
Some areas of Ukraine, there's so much of this cable on the ground it looks like spider webs.
Control these drones. And those are the most deadly on the front line, because you can't do anything about it. You can't even detect them with a drone detector.
So what is that like? Have you seen the kamikaze drones hit and explode?
Well, I guess just over 3 weeks ago, I was in the Kursk region of Russia, trying to actually get back from the front line. And I was with a team from the Russian forces Akhmat brigade, and they were evacuating civilians from the front line. We actually got to the point of, as they called it, the point of zero, which at the edge of the village where we were the Ukrainian forces. And as we got there, there were several overhead, and they engaged one on the ground, and it came down. It wasn't that intense, you could say. So they loaded the civilians in this truck. So in the cab of the truck were these 4 elderly civilians, and the soldier that was driving. And then myself and another journalist, a colleague of mine, were in the back of the truck with 2 soldiers. And we were trying to evacuate this village. And as we got out of just outside the village, I happened to be filming one of the soldiers as they were scanning the skies, and the other soldier actually pointed up and said a drone and a few other curse words. And I looked up, and there was a drone, a kamikaze drone. Right away, I knew what it was, and I knew the danger we were in. And the soldiers started firing on it, engaging it, trying to knock it down as it was trying to attack us and kill us. And they signaled to the driver, and the driver just floored it. It was just driving as fast as possible. And I'm filming them shooting at the drone. The drone's trying to hit us. I thought that we were going to be, worst, best case scenario, injured.
They shot it down. That's why it's celebrating.
Because it got so close to us as we were just driving, just got right up on us. And then after about 5 minutes of it chasing us, well, what felt like 5 minutes, might have been a few minutes less, it was knocked down. And
how do you knock down a drone? How do you knock down a suicide drone over you?
They were engaging it with a shotgun and machine guns. And
I'd imagine the same way as you hunt birds. Hunters hunt birds, little pellets, because you don't need a huge amount of force. You just shotgun has a good spread. It seems like a good anti-drone weapon, except it's not that fast to reload.
And it was coming at us, and it was in the video. It's a little bit unclear if their bullets actually hit it or it hit a wire that was going over the road. But for about 5 minutes, 3 minutes, something like that, they were firing at it with a shotgun and a machine gun. Now the shotgun is the new weapon of choice on the front line because it's got the buckshot and it spreads. And
exactly.
The idea is there's more room to hit.
You're covering a bigger area with a shotgun. That's the reason hunters, when they hunt birds, they don't use bullets. They use shotguns with pellets, because a pellet is enough to knock out a drone with the force of a shotgun. And so, of course, that'd be a weapon of choice.
Like you're shooting at a bird. That's actually what they call these drones, birds. So they go hunting with this shotgun for these drones. And luckily, thank God, God was with us that day, and it did not hit its target. So we made it to report another day.
Mother's Day is almost here, and you're under a lot of...
Yeah, this is from 1 year ago, Mother's Day.
Make sure to say that you heard about Cozy Earth from us on this show. So one of the most confusing questions in the West is the most obvious question, which is who's winning. And even now we're told that Ukraine, has a shot to win. Lindsey Graham has been saying this even recently. If only U.S. taxpayers would send Zelensky's government more money. What's your perspective as someone who's covering the war from the front lines?
Well, I think the idea of Ukraine winning the war is just this dream in narrative that's been put out by the West to make it acceptable for so much money to be put into Ukraine to extend this war, to bring Russian forces down in the country of Russia, just to make them use their resources more, including losing more people.
All you have to do is look at a map. This is a Ukraine-run map. Let's go back a year. See that huge change? Let's go back a year more than that. Okay, so this is a map 2 years ago. Now, today, Russia's gotten all that fortress belt that I said that the Ukrainians built in Donetsk, their city of Donetsk. They've nearly gone through all those fortifications. And without any further fortifications, the Russians will move faster once they've, this year, most likely. They will have. Also, the Ukrainian army is running out of men.
People. I mean, if the United States and the West would not have been supplying the weapons and the funding to Ukraine for the last 3 years, the war would have ended 3 years ago, if not 2.5 years ago. And hundreds of thousands of lives would have been saved. It is the funding and the support of the West for Ukraine is directly responsible for hundreds of thousands of these deaths of soldiers on both sides and civilians, for that matter.
How many have died? The other question that we can never get a straight answer to, or any answer to, is how many have died on both sides. Do you have any guess?
A lot.
It's hard for me to say. My kind of thing in my reports is reporting on what I see, keeping my opinions out of it. So what I can tell you is of what I've seen. One of the hottest areas that I was been before Kursk and Belgrade, where I am now, was Mariupol front line, where I followed the Russian front line day by day in the heat of the Battle of Mariupol. And just in that month, I personally saw between 1,000 and 2,000 bodies, and it was soldiers, civilians. The whole city was just covered in bodies. In a matter of a 30-minute period, one time I counted 87 bodies just lining the streets. It's really a horrible situation. Just seeing so many war crimes involved, so many testimonies from locals about Ukrainian forces. Basically,
you have to remember the Azov Brigade thinks the wrong side won in World War II. When the Germans versus the Russians, it should have been the Germans that won, according to the Azov Brigade. They intensely dislike ethnic Russians. So when they're fighting in these ethnic Russian regions of Ukraine, they're not treating the local population well.
Literally, these are not my words. These are the words of the locals. That everything I say can be seen on my YouTube channel. These locals say that Ukrainian forces literally use them as human shields, would set up their...
Again, he has videos going back decades from before the war documenting all of this that you can go and check out if you don't believe it.
Tanks in between the apartment buildings and fire at Russian forces. And in other cases, they would directly fire on the civilian buildings. Ukraine forces directly firing on civilian buildings. This is what the locals told me on camera, and it can be seen, not just one-off, a constant daily event. Unfortunately, there was many instances of Ukrainian forces using schools as bases. One of my first days in Mariupol found a school number 25 of Mariupol. I'll never forget it. Went into the basement and found that Ukrainian forces were using this basement as a position, military position. And
schools are usually big buildings, and they make good logistic centers, so they're often used in war, unfortunately.
Many burned out rooms and weapons, uniforms, flags, Ukrainian flags, and unfortunately, we found a dead civilian woman who's she was naked, and she had a bag over her head and was clearly raped and tortured, and it was clearly a civilian from the area that Ukrainian forces had.
Again, they think the wrong side won in World War II.
Kidnapped and tortured and raped, and they carved. It's actually a little unclear whether it was burned or carved a swastika on her stomach. This is the first time that it stood out to me, the psychological effect of some of these instances when you see it. In my mind, I still remember seeing a band.
So that's what the Russians are fighting. And Russian media is covering this. Russian media knows what the Azov Brigade is. The Russians know the monsters that they're fighting, they're not going to surrender to these monsters.
Bandage over her head, kind of like something like she was injured and it was bandaged. But if you look at the video, you see it was a plastic bag that was used to execute her. Now that's just one of the many examples of executions that I've seen by Ukrainian forces. The most recent were in the Kursk region, just this last January, where I was with Russian regular army forces, and they had just days before gotten to this village and basically kicked Ukrainian forces out, and the village was destroyed. And there was a shelter, a basement basically, that we went down into and found a group of civilians. There was two elderly women and one elderly man that had been killed clearly by Ukrainian forces, because as we walked down the steps, the smell was so bad we had to put gas masks on. And at the bottom of the steps couldn't really say how many people, because it was clear that some sort of explosive, I assume a grenade, was thrown down in the shelter where these people were hiding. And the people near the door, actually with a dog that were there, were just turned into,
killing dogs,
basically. So it wasn't really clear how many were there. But then as we went farther back into the shelter, found, as I said, two elderly women that were killed by the explosion and an elderly man. And then back in August, as I said, when Ukraine first came in to Kursk, I was also there and met a man.
One reason U.S.-backed forces all around the world commit all these atrocities is because there's no consequences. It's just like Pizzagate, Epstein, and torture chamber for young girls. If no one knows about it, even if it leaks, the media won't cover it. They just won't cover it. They never cover the crimes of this group of people, and it's infuriating. You can read thousands, hundreds of thousands. If you take Syrian testimonies, Ukrainian testimonies, like going all the way back to Nicaragua, of testimonies of the absolute atrocities committed by CIA-backed forces. And not once is it ever covered in the West.
And who explained how he was trying to evacuate his family from the Suja.
And as my sister is a journalist, I know the reasons why they don't cover it, because there's no credible. They can't go in and interview the witnesses in these regions. Journalists aren't allowed to do that, and they're not going to be going in embedded with the Russian troops, seeing the things firsthand. Journalists aren't allowed to do that, and it's called Russian propaganda. It's the same reason governments don't publish like rape, gloss over rapes by migrants in Europe. It's anything that it doesn't fit the narrative is ignored.
Region, which was basically the stronghold of Ukrainian forces when they came into the Kursk region of Russia. And he explained how he was evacuating his wife, pregnant wife, their 1-year-old son, and his wife's mother. And they had two vehicles. And this is basically, they were surprised that war broke out in their village because they weren't part of the war zone before August. And so he's decided he was going to drive in the front car and have his family in the back with his wife driving behind, just in case something's happened, it would hit him first and they might make it away. And he said they were driving, came around a turn and came face to face with a Ukraine or pro-Ukraine soldier. He said just 2 meters away from him. He said there was no way that the soldier did not see that they were civilians. There was no question they were civilians. And the soldier opened fire. The bullet went through the bill of his cap and a few into his vehicle. And they kept on driving as they were being fired at, and got some distance between and went around another corner. And these are his words, not mine. And he saw that his wife's vehicle was slowing down, and he waved for her to speed up. And then when her car hit the back of his car, he knew something was wrong. And he went back to check on his family in the other car, and his wife, pregnant wife, was huddled over their 1-year-old son with bullet holes in the side of her stomach. And he picked her up, took her to the nearest hospital they could find, and They weren't able to save her. He tried to do CPR, in his words, massage her heart back to life. And their 1-year-old son was injured, but thank God he lived. And then unfortunately, he wasn't able to recover her body for many months afterwards. But now things have changed quite considerably in the Kursk region. As I said, it started in August with Ukraine just surprising many coming across, taking 1,500 square kilometers, and
all the territory has been taken back. Ukraine did this incursion in Kursk, right here, Kursk, and now Russian took all the territory back, and now they've taken a bit of Ukrainian land. They're not going to allow an incursion like that again.
Right when they did that, Russia started taking some back, and I was with them. I went with the assault groups to the Ukrainian lines as the assault groups took territory back, Russia started going and taking these villages back, and almost slowed down as far as the recovery of the territory by Russian forces until last month, when an operation of Russian forces literally went into these gas pipes and they tunneled underneath Ukrainian lines.
Yeah, I remember this.
600 Russian soldiers came up behind Ukrainian lines, and that operation with an assault from the other side basically collapsed Ukrainian lines, and now there's just a very small amount of Ukrainian forces left in the Kursk region. And just yesterday there were
also a lot of those who went into Kursk were mercenaries, were not from Ukraine. They gathered from around the world. There were Polish troops in there that went into Russia. It's, from what I hear, the reporting, that's what the Russians found when they checked the bodies afterwards. Anyway, I think that's enough. It's not a pleasant subject. So that is the reality from the Russian side and what they're fighting against. The Ukrainian side has been committing war crimes long before this actually became the Ukraine-Russia war and shelling of Donbass. The Azov Brigade are monsters, and not all Ukrainians are monsters, but the government and Azov Brigade, the main fighting force of Ukraine, are don't feel bad if they die. Anyway, this will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch, and I'll see you next video. Bye.